Alright, let's do this one last time.
Hey guys, what is up? JTX here. Today I'm bringing you a new build guide for my ToTA League Discharge character. Disclaimer, this build is not intended as a pure mapping character. If you're looking for a pure mapping character, this is not the build for you. This character has been designed for some very specific content, namely Sanctum and ToTA, and doing Uber bosses. Outside of those types of content, there'll be a lot of other builds that'll be better than this. So if you are looking for a pure mapping character, this is not the character for you. With that being said, this character has become one of the most, I think, powerful characters possible for the aforementioned League mechanics, especially ToTA. It's one of the few builds that can actually clear 2000 rating ToTA without having to rely on Void Sphere. Now you might say that all builds can technically do ToTA at 2000. This build can 2 or 3 tap the boss at 2000 rating, and it can pretty much delete everything in ToTA at 2k rating plus. For reference, I did ToTA exclusively on this character from 97 onwards, for starter level 97, and my character is almost level 99 now. So I ran this character from 170 rating, which is your starting rating in ToTA, all the way up to 2000, and I think I only lost 1 tournament, and that was due to me being very greedy with how I didn't buy any troops, so mainly player error. In terms of this current build, the current version you're seeing in front of you this is more optimized for Sanctum. The ToTA version will be a little bit different to this because we don't really care about life, so this build methodology is a little bit different. I'll quickly go through the character itself. It is a Discharge assassin that uses the Ralakesh's Impatience interaction. By turning the boots off, we can gain all of our charges without the downside of losing it when we move. There's another video has been done on this by, I believe, Emil God. He's done a great video explaining how the mechanic works. But essentially, the mechanic is just when you have Ralakesh's Impatience on, if you do stand still, you gain all your charges, and then when you move, you lose those charges. There's a very weird interaction in the game with the boots being off. The boots will still technically function. So when we do a weapon swap makes us count as though we're standing still, and it makes the boots effect proc, even though the boots aren't technically on. I think it's got something to do with how the game checks if we're stationary, and then it applies whether we're wearing boots. So in this case, our boots will be counted as on, so that we get the effects of all our charges while doing a weapon swap without losing them, because our boots technically don't work. And it's a weird interaction, but all you have to know is if you equip Ralakesh, you make sure you switch it off by putting in like a high level gem after you've actually equipped the boots. And then this build will essentially mean you can generate charges without having to worry about losing them with the Ralakesh. The idea of the build is to build as many charges as we can to do a massive discharge, dumping all of our charges in one go and inflicting massive damage. So in PoB, currently our average hit is about 363 million damage. That's with all our charges up and also a couple of effects ticked in. But the damage itself, even if without optimized scenarios, we're still hitting for like 200 plus million very consistently. We don't care about the DPS itself. We actually care about the average hit because nothing really survives after the first or second hit of the build. So the DPS is less important than the average hit of what we're actually doing. In terms of gearing the build, we're just looking to stack a bunch of powerful effects that scale Discharge's gem level, as well as getting as many power charges into the build as possible. So I'll quickly go over the gear in the build. So for the gloves, we really want to run a Surge Binders, ideally with one of 2 possible corruptions. The ideal one we can get is Plasma Socketed Gems with Curse Ellie Weakness on hit, but very unlikely. I think if you can't get those 2 in a combination, just go for Plasma Socketed Gems like I have here. And this will just be our Aura gloves. These gloves are very, very powerful because of the effect they give. They give increased spell damage per power charge, increased elemental damage per frenzy charge. And this also ties into our necklace, which is Badge of the Brotherhood. The reason why this is so powerful is for each power charge that we get an additional frenzy charge. So essentially, if you get a 1 power charge, it double dips and gives you a free frenzy charge on top of things, which is why it's encouraged to scale as many power charges as possible in this build, because you get an additional frenzy charge for each power charge you gain. This also explains why the reason we Assassins natively get an extra power charge, and we get a nice bunch of Ascendancy notables just for crit. I'll go into the Ascendancy choices later, but just know that the build itself heavily involves scaling crit multi, and the amount of damage we can actually guarantee in one hit. For weapon choice, we are running a Void Battery because of the effect it gives. It was 1 additional power charge. It's also, as well as spell damage per power charge. It's very powerful for our build. Ideally, you want a Corruption with LE Pen for 10%. If you can't get one of these early, just run a regular Void Battery. And our offhand is a Malachai's Loop. You need 2 sets of this because of the interaction of how our build actually works. When you discharge, you lose all your charges, right? But when you swap your weapon, you get all the weapon charges back. So you're alternating between 2 sets of weapons to keep discharging and keeping your charges up. So pretty much after each discharge, you're doing a weapon swap to keep your charges up. You'll get used to the playstyle pretty quickly. And alternatively, you can also bind your weapon swap to a more accessible keys, potentially on your mouse as well. So you can do a discharge and weapon swap almost simultaneously, allowing for very quick discharge cycling. That explains why we need to have 2 sets of the exact same weapon. For our helmet, we're looking for an additional max power charge where possible. So you can see here Heat Shiver with a +1 max power charge and the discharge radius enchant. This is actually very, very good for the second type of version of this build. So there's one where you front load your first hit. So your first hit does a massive amount of damage. And then the other version is your first hit primes your second hit. So your first hit applies everything that you want, and your second hit is the massive one. So in terms of Heat Shiver lets you prime a very, very powerful second discharge because of the effect of our first one will hit the maximum amount of chill and also maximum amount of freeze on an enemy. If you're not running Heat Shiver, you can also run a helmet like this. It's just a +1 max power charge Warlord mod, and it's been Awakened Orbed with a Shaper mod with nearby enemies take increased elemental damage. Note that this is the elevated shaping mod. This is the one ideally you want. The other mods in the helmet aren't that important. It's just mainly those 2 mods that we want. And obviously you can try Double Corrupt for an additional power charge. On this helmet, we can get lucky, we've got Fire Gems. But ideally, the endgame helmet is a +2 power charge helmet. It's about 250 lives to make if you do really want to go for it, but not needed for this build because you're already hitting pretty much a ridiculous number. For our chest piece, we're running a Dialer's Malefaction. Nothing too much to say here. It's really good for gem levels because we run in power 4. Then we run a discharge, so our discharge is level 29. We run 2 green sockets, so one for Divergent Power Charge and Crit because of the effect that additional quality gives us more spell damage per power charge. So this is actually really powerful for Divergent Power Charge, giving it some quality. And then Second Wind Support. Second Wind Support gives us a second charge of our discharge. Normally discharge, if we take it out, it's just a single charge and we have to wait for the cooldown. Having Second Winds gives us 2 charges and also makes the cooldown a little bit faster because of the quality. In terms of the belt, we're running a Torrent's Reclamation. It doesn't have to be a Torrent's Reclamation. I just like it because it has the inbuilt cooldown recovery. You can also run a Shaper belt with the same type of mod. But it also gives us a Harbinger of Time, which gives us this little guy here. He gives us action speed occasionally, which makes the build feel very smooth when running like Sanctum or just general boss fights. Just giving us that extra action speed definitely feels very nice. It also gives us, without Corruption, you can aim for like potentially like Zealotry increased effect or increased crit multi, a couple of extra things, and it gives us a little bit of attack and cast speed, which is always nice. Obviously for our boots, we're running a Ralakesh's Impatience. These boots don't have to be active at all, so the gems you put inside don't matter at all. The only caveat is you want to put a gem that you can't run, so in my case I'm using Grace because I only have 153 dex, so the Grace gem turns off my boots. It's very important that the boots are turned off for the build to work, but it just makes sure that you don't have too much of the stat, so the boots are always off. For our rings, we're actually running max power charge rings on the Implicit, so these are synthesized Topaz rings or synthesized Circles of Regret. Ideally for the build is a rare ring, which is a rare +1 power charge ring, but those are about 200 divines right now, and essentially the damage you kind of gain is just the crit multi you can roll on the rings, so not a crazy amount. We care more about the power charge this ring gives. I think I picked these up for about 40 divines each. This is obviously endgame upgrades for the build. Before you even get to that point, you can just run a regular +1 endurance charge ring. These are about like 10 divs a pop, and if you want to go very, very budget, you can go Calm's Way for additional endurance charge at the beginning, so those are pretty much 1 chaos each. These are the kind of like the end game options, and also the very end game is obviously getting a Calandra's Touch and mirroring your other ring. Not necessarily needed at all for this build because you do hit a point where you have so much damage you don't really know what to do with it. I'll quickly go over the gem links here. So in our chest we have Anomalous Discharge. Anomalous Discharge is really nice because we get the additional cast speed, which makes the build feel a lot smoother, being able to cast Discharge like very fast. link that to a Empower 4 ideally, Trinity support, Divergent Power Charge and Crit, Awakened LE Focus support. This is actually particularly strong because of the additional support elemental skill gems you get when you push it to level 6, so it makes Discharge get another level. I recommend actually using either a Conk effect or LE Pen gem in Sanctum if you have enough damage already. This will just let us guarantee freeze everything that we don't kill on our first tap, or at least guarantee a maximum chill. And our final one is just a second wind support. In our weapon, these weapons have to mirror each other, so in both sets of the weapon, they'll be the exact same gems. So whatever you see in my first slot will be the exact what I have in my second set of weapons. So Immortal Call with cosmic damage taken, Flame Dash as a movement skill. On our shield charge with faster attack and momentum support. So these are pretty much both these are just our mobility skills. Just have them in both sets of weapons, so when you do swap, you have access to the same thing. In our gloves, we're running a Zealotry linked with Enlighten, Divergent Purity of Elements, and Haste. The +1 to the gloves makes our Enlighten 5. You can also get a Enlighten 3 and make it level 4 with the gloves, so very powerful just to get a +1 gloves, and also pretty cheap. And these auras, so for example, Purity of Elements is kind of necessary because we run so many uniques in the build, it's kind of hard to fit our resistances in. So this also makes us immune to elemental elements. So Double Wind gives us all Capsular Reses and also gives us element immunity. And a Haste is generally just to speed up our mapping because we don't have a boot slot. Without Haste, we'll be pretty damn slow. So having a Haste there kind of just gives us a bit of supplements, a bit of movement speed. And we also have Elusive from Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flash Jewels. I'll talk about those in a second. In our helmet, we have Elemental Weakness attached to Arcanist brand. And then we have Summer Skitterbots as our final aura. So the order of actually doing a fight is when you find something that you won't kill in one shot, you pretty much prime it with a Alchemist brand, then you drop your Bottled Faith initially, and then you discharge twice, or whatever many times it takes to kill things. Generally twice is the amount you need to kill most things in the game, unless you're fighting a ridiculously juiced or rolled Uber Pinnacle boss. You won't need to do more than 2 or 3 discharges on the boss. We also have a Starlight Chalice for additional exposure if we need to. The rest of our flasks aren't as important. We just care about the Bottled Faith and our Life Flask, maybe a Quicksilver Flask. The 4th and 5th flasks are very optional. You can run a Silver Flask if you don't have Onslaught from anywhere else on your gear. I run a Jade Flask just for a bit of evasion because this build is quite squishy. As you can see, we only have about 2.8k life. That's actually more than enough life for Sanctum. I've never actually failed a Sanctum run ever since I started running this character, and I had about 2.9k to 3k life the whole entire time. Nothing's ever come close to killing me in Sanctum, simply because the radius on our Discharge is so large. We kill everything before anything even gets a chance to kill us. So I touched on the actual Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flash before. We're running a Mistwalker here, which gives us Elusive on Critical Strike. So this gives us even more chance to avoid damage from hits, and also gives us movement speed. So the Elusive combined with our Haste actually makes us feel pretty smooth in terms of Sanctum. You actually get pretty fast. So you see in the footage earlier, or the footage I'm playing right now, the build is actually quite smooth and pretty zippy in Sanctum, which is always nice if you want to run Sanctums fast. So for our Ascendancy choices, we're going for Unstable Infusion, Deadly Infusion, Ambush and Assassinate, and Opportunistic in that order ideally, but it shouldn't matter too much because they're all just great ways of adding damage to the build. And we also cap out our crit with the amount of power charges that we run. So the actual crit chance from a lot of these Ascendancy nodes kind of loses value after we get enough crit. In terms of an alternative for our Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh, we can also run Like Clockwork. This gives us 30% increased cooldown recovery, so it makes our discharges much faster. The only downside is we lose Mistwalker, so our build becomes much slower. This is the swap you would make in ToTA League, because you don't really care about your movement speed in ToTA. You care about more just getting as many discharges out as possible. So with Like Clockwork, you can discharge like relatively consistently, like pretty fast. That's just a alternative that you can make for the content you're running. I prefer Mistwalker for almost every other content besides ToTA League. For our skill tree, this tree pretty much grabs as many charges as we can, and also crit. So if you look at the tree here, we're just going down to grab pretty much every source of power charge on the tree. So Instability, Infused, and Overcharge. And then we're grabbing also from the shadows here. So this gives us the Dagger Mastery, which gives us 100% crit multi against enemies that are full life. And because everything we're discharging normally dies on one tap, we're getting the full benefit from this. So we're just getting pretty much 100 crit multi for free onto the build. We also get Elusive Effect on this, and a bit of movement speeds, which is great for the build. The other big thing is we're running multiple cluster setups because we just want pure damage for the build. So the clusters we're running are either increased cold damage or increased lightning damage. Both are equally fine. So you run Prismatic Heart and Snowstorm, and then Widespread Destruction is the third node that you don't take. You can if you want, but this is mainly just to make sure that we get Prismatic Heart and Snowstorm in the right locations. So we run 3 of these clusters for a bit of extra damage and also a bit of resistances, because obviously our gear is a bit unique, well, not all unique, so we need to run resistances where we can. And we also run a Megalomaniac here with Master of Fear, so enemies you curse are unnerved, and we're applying our curse either through our Glove Corruption or through our Arcanist brand plus Ellie Weakness curse setup. And we run Righteous Path, so Zealotry becomes cheaper to reserve. This is important if we want to run Skitterbots and Haste as well. Otherwise, you're picking between one or the other, so definitely run this with a bit of reservation efficiency on your tree, and you'll be able to run all 4 of these auras. I have the whole PoB below, so you can follow along with my tree. Your tree and my tree might look a little bit different depending on the type of gear that you do pick up. Mainly, it'll just be trying to balance your stats around having enough strength, dex, int, not too much dex if you want to turn off your boots, or not too much strength if you want to turn off your boots. Doesn't matter how you turn off your boots, as long as you have a gem there that takes more stats than you have available. Normally that'll be dex or strength. Int's normally very high on assassins, and you also need very high int for your void battery, so you want to use int to turn off your boots. For our dual choices, it's pretty straightforward. We just want as much crit multi as possible, and you also squeeze in resistance if you need, where possible, if you still need resistance somewhere. Our Watcher's Eye is a Zealotry with Pen, so critical strikes penetrate 10% of elemental res. Since our crit strike chance is 100%, we pretty much get free additional 10 pen. And I'm also running a Onslaught for on kill, affected by haste. This is just nicer for Sanctum running and mapping. Nothing too crazy about the Watcher's Eye there. And we also could run a Immutable Force. There's a couple of ways to actually avoid stun in this build. So you can run a Immutable Force just to give you a crazy amount of stun recovery. You can also change your Zealot's Oath or any of your keystones here with the new tattoo. This one changes your keystone, so you could potentially change this to Unwavering Stance, which means you can't dodge anymore, but it also means you can't be stunned. Generally, not really important because you don't want to get hit anyway on a build like this because you're pretty squishy. But if you do want to find ways of getting stun immunity, those are both ways you could use to avoid any stuns that could disrupt your discharge hit. And the only other thing to note is here with our Militant Faith, we're running a High Templar Dominus Militant Faith, so we convert the keystone here into Inner Conviction, so we gain more spell damage per power charge. We don't care about the second mode because Ralakesh gives us all our charges anyway, regardless, so to gain power charge instead of frenzy charge doesn't really affect our build. So this is pretty much straight up whatever 3% more per power charge, so about 30% up to 40% more spell damage just from this one notable alone, which is very powerful for the build. And the final thing of the little tech from this league is you can run a +1 max power charge on your tree here. So this is I believe a dex notable here. You just anoint this. So this was actually called, I think, Thief's Craft or Thief's Cunning. Thief's Craft here. You just anoint that on your amulet, and then it'll give you the tattooed effect. So make sure you just tattoo this first, and then you can anoint it here. So it just gives us an extra power charge, which is really, really powerful. Just having a power charge readily accessible to us for the tree like that is a crazy amount of damage for very low cost. I believe the tattoos are like 40 to 60 C now, maybe even less. In terms of the Pantheon, nothing too crazy. If you don't go for the Immutable Force or for the Keystone tech, you can run Solve the Brine King. If you have a way of avoiding stun, you can just go for Solve Solaris, so chance to take less area damage from hits. And then you also run a Tukohama, so for less damage when you stand still. Sometimes we do stand still for Discharge consistently. Make sure you don't take Ralakesh. If you take Ralakesh, it turns the boots off because it interacts somehow with checking while we're moving or not, which turns off the interaction with our boots. So make sure you don't run Ralakesh at all. You want to run any other of the minor tendencies, just not running Ralakesh. I'll quickly jump into PoB now, so you can have a look at what the actual numbers look like. Yep, so now that we're in PoB, we can see that the average hit for the build is about 363 million. This is actually the more conservative damage of this build. If I'm running the full endgame damage version for ToTA with pretty much 0 defenses, damage average hit about 700, 800 million, scaling up to close to 1 billion, depending on the effect of shock. I don't normally set the shock to 50% for any build, and no one should in PoB unless you're hitting a crazy amount. This is one of the few times where you could probably set your shock to the maximum amount. So over here, because we are hitting so ridiculously hard, we're probably going to be getting pretty close to the max shock. So if we set our shock to 40%, damage goes up a bit, 50%, even more. But we'll leave it right now at the generic value of 15%. to simulate for these purposes for the build, just to be a bit conservative. Is enemy on full life, so make sure this is ticked. Make sure that we also have chill and frozen effect. These should all be capped out to the max, simply because we want to represent the heat shiver damage as well. And also for our Trinity support, if you're running one, it should be 50, the lowest resonance count. So this would be your second hit. If your first hit won't have the Trinity, so first hit will be a little bit less, but your second hit will spike up a lot more because you've got Trinity on. Generally speaking, your Trinity will always be maxed out while you're doing ToTA because you'll be constantly killing things. The only time you don't have Trinity straight away is when you're finding Sanctum bosses, but on your second hit, you'll be applying it, and most bosses don't survive more than 2 hits. As you can see from the actual defensive stats, this build obviously is not meant to be a super tank or defensive character. This character is essentially used for running very specific endgame content, notably Sanctum, and you can use it to farm Uber Pinnacle bosses. You probably see in the footage at the very start of the video, it deletes those Uber encounters in a couple of seconds. Defenses aren't really needed if the boss is dead in the first 2 to 3 seconds. Obviously, the disclaimer is there that this build is not meant to be your general mapper. This build's highly specialized for the content that you want it to do. So if you're interested in running a very, very powerful Sanctum character, this is generally not that expensive because of the entry cost. Is just the Badge of the Brotherhood and the Ralakesh. You can run this very, very early and then start running Sanctums. I started running Sanctums when I had about 80 to 90 million average hit, and that was fine. And then I incrementally upgraded my gear. So I would say I started running Sanctums consistently when I had about maybe 20 divs worth of gear into the build, and I haven't failed since then. So I never failed the Sanctum ever since I started running at that point. A quick point as well, for our chest piece, a Dialis, the ideal endgame chest piece is a +1/+2 Dialis, so +1 Socketed Gems, +2 AoE Gems. There are 2 of those on the market at the moment with 2 mirrors. Absolutely not necessary for the build. It does add a crazy amount of damage to the build if you do want to run it. You can also potentially just run a +2 or a +1 individually. Those are like 60 or 70 div respectively. Again, not really necessary because of how much we actually hit already. Those are just nice to have if you want to make endgame upgrades. The bare minimum of the build, it can be done for less than 10 divines, and then depending on how much you want to invest into the build gets more and more crazy. If you want to be running 2000 rating ToTA consistently and blow up pretty much everything you see, I would recommend anything between the 50 to 80 divine budget range, and you'll get to the point where you'll be consistently just rolling over ToTA League, especially if we swap to the low life glass cannon version of the build, because defenses aren't very important at later on. So you've seen the regular version of the build. I'll quickly show you the ToTA version, or like the very low life glass cannon. Not even glass cannon, we'll call it a paper mache cannon, because glass has some sort of substance. This is literally paper thin, but it hits like a truck. So I'll quickly show you that version of the character if you were interested in running a pure ToTA character. So this is the low life version of the build, specifically for ToTA, pushing ideally to 2000 plus. Build gear is about the same, only a few changes with the gem swaps and also our tree. Since in ToTA, past a certain point, maybe like 1000, defenses really don't matter anymore. Having like 5000 life versus 1 life is about the same because everything's going to start one-shotting you. And also resistance is like no defensive mechanics outside of like dodge or evade will really help you. This build really capitalizes on this by going just raw damage, and it pushes our build somewhere between the vicinity of 600 to 800 million damage. So to really let us just 1 or 2 tap the ToTA bosses. Generally, it's a very smooth playstyle for the build. You just go in, tap the bosses, wait for them to respawn, pretty much spawn trap them while your team takes over the all the totems. The only caveat is sometimes there will be some deaths based on some mechanics. For example, calm self-destructing units or proximity shields. Those both are a little bit annoying for the build. But for other parts of the build, for example, Titanic Shell, build doesn't care at all. Blast through the Titanic Shield in 1 shot. So it's kind of like a trade-off. You will die in ToTA with this build occasionally, because things sometimes can tap you like a lightning bird, or some mob can randomly come and hit you. But in general, this build, going up to 2000, 2000 onwards, I think I've done maybe 100 or 200 more rating after 2000. I've never failed a tournament. I think I might have lost 1 fight or 2 fight here and there, but never ever failed a whole tournament before. I'll quickly go over the build changes now. The main changes is we've entirely reserved our life now. So we have a Wrath linked to Arrogance. So Wrath is a massive damage aura for us, because with Discharge, the highest damage we do is with Lightning with our power charges. So Wrath is a big damage multiplier attached with our Arrogance. We also slot in a Herald of Ash for just a little bit more damage. We're dropping all our defensive auras now, so we're not running Purity of Elements anymore. We slotted in, we kept our Skitterbots and Zealotry, and we slotted in Hatred as well. So we're getting Hatred and Wrath just for additional damage auras. All the other gems are generally the same. We've also slotted in a Temporal Chains, and this comes to do with the gear. So we've got a Balance of Terror. With when you cast Temporal Chains, it makes your cooldown recovery faster. So just if you compare like the regular discharge speed, the cooldown, it's like decently fast. Then when you pop the Temporal Chains, like the cooldown speed gets kind of like crazy. So that's why we're running the Balance of Terror, just to give us a bit more cooldown. So you normally just pop a temp chains at the very start of a ToTA or start of a fight, and then you recast it when you get a chance every 10 seconds. In terms of the other changes for the tree, we've dropped all the life on the tree, as you can see. We picked up Pain Attunement for even more damage because we are low life now with the life being reserved by Wrath. We picked up a bunch more Megalomaniacs now, so these Megalomaniacs are just purely for damage, so Force Multiplier for double damage, Pressure Points for more double damage. Brutal one for me, just an extra nice note to have that's actually useful. This one, Pressure Points again, Master of Fear. So then on this one down here, Pressure Points and Force Multiplier. So it gives us about 25% chance to deal double damage, which for a build like this is insane. If you do proc the double damage, nothing's going to survive. If it gets hit by double damage, you'll notice it because the boss will instantly get deleted. Only other small change is we're also running down here to get Snowforged, and to get the Elemental Mastery, hits have 25% chance to treat enemy resistances as inverted. This is actually really, really strong because if we proc the invert, it gives us a massive spike in our damage because we don't have that much minus elemental resistance outside of our curse on hit early weakness on our gloves, which is only minus 15. It does make this a little bit counterintuitive because you lose, like the minus 15 gives them plus 15 res when they invert, but in general, having this node is a massive damage boost when it does proc, especially if it procs in conjunction with our double damage. You're going to just be deleting things in like a one hit. One other change for the build is we're actually running a Clockwork now instead of Mistwalker, simply because if we are in ToTA, we don't care too much about the movement speed. We want the cooldown reduction that Clockwork grants us. It's really, really powerful to make the build discharge more frequently. And with the Clockwork plus the actual temp chains, I have the Balance of Terror interaction, you're going to be discharging very, very frequently. So that's just like another little trick for the ToTA version. You're running a Clockwork set of jewels. So I'll quickly jump to the PoB now so you can see what the numbers are actually like. So here's the PoB. We're sitting at about 600 million average hit. I'll make sure I turn off the grace here because that's not actually on, so our mana is actually unreserved. Same configs as before. I've set shock to 30 here at least. I think 30 is just a very conservative guess on how much we're going to shock enemies. I think realistically we could go up to like 40 or 50. Like I said before, we're hitting very hard with our shock here. All the other configs are essentially the same, nothing too crazy here. And yeah, having the this type of damage for ToTA is kind of disgusting. It's way more than you'll need for any other content in the game. You can also take it to fight Uber Pinnacle bosses, but do note that since it's a very low life build, it's pretty much a kill or be killed scenario. So you'll see some of the footage earlier at the start of the video where you're fighting the boss, you can just delete them in one hit before they even get a chance. So that's kind of your defensive layer, is in you're going to be killing things before they even get a chance to attack. But if they do attack, there's a very high chance that you die because obviously you have no life reserved. So keep that in mind if you are taking on Pinnacle bosses, that you may potentially die sometimes. But in general, this build will delete anything and all mechanics become irrelevant when they get hit by 600 million damage. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's one of I haven't made a build guide in a bit. I've been enjoying playing ToTA League a lot actually. One of the few leagues that I played for quite a bit, so I haven't been making as much content as previously. Hopefully after this build guide goes live, I'll be starting a new character. You can follow along at twitch.tv/JTX if you do want to catch me live and ask me any questions about the build or ask me any questions in general. Hopefully you guys have a fun time with this build. I definitely thought it was very cool considering that it's an alternative to a lot of the existing endgame ToTA builds, which involves using the Void Sphere, max block tech. Having a build that can actually kill and destroy teams at 2K is very, very satisfying. Let me know how you guys go with the build if you do try to follow it. And just note that, once again, that this build is very, very specialized for certain content. It's not meant to be an all-content character, and it's very good at what it does. If you really liked the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.